BRUCAST is back, baby.
This BRUCAST episode is brought to you by the BRUCAST Store. Explore a store filled with awesome goodies from hoodies to t-shirts to mugs. We've got you covered. Stay in style with BRUCAST. Embrace the shock, set the trend. Visit now brew-cast.com/store. Link below.
Back with the fire, can't you see the flames? From Deutschland steps comes the BRUCAST name. Voices like thunder breaking all the chains. Unleash the fury like a runaway train.
Alright, hi everyone, welcome back to another BRUCAST episode. If it's your first time watching the show, make sure to like and subscribe. If you're listening to Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please rate the show 5 stars. This will ensure that the podcast recommends to even more people and allow me to keep doing what I love. BRUCAST also on Instagram, X, and TikTok, where I upload shorts with the highlights of the show. So follow now, BRUCAST on Instagram, X, and TikTok. Links in the description below.
Here we thrive, we survive!
Hey there, BRUCAST fans, you know what's up? I know what's up. It's time to talk about next month's giveaway. Yes, you keep liking, you keep subscribing, you keep commenting. We're gonna keep doing the giveaways. Has been a huge success so far. By the way, we're still waiting for the last winner to reach out. We tried to reach out to you. Just check it out. The last giveaway that we did, one of you won, and it was like the eco bag from the BRUCAST store. We're gonna make sure to deliver it out for you, no matter you are in the world. So go check it out. And again, next month we're gonna reveal the next winner. So keep liking, keep subscribing, and keep commenting, because those are the requirements in order to participate in our giveaways. All right, so without further ado, let's talk about today's guest. His name is Dr. Alexander Hutchison. You know him from episode 44, and now he's back. But in case you haven't watched episode number, go watch it right now. But if you haven't watched yet, Dr. Hutchison, he's a leading expert in fitness and wellness, known for his bold stance on doping in sports and trans women in sport, as explored in his new book, An Unfair Advantage in Sports, The Body Matters. So he combines his extensive academic background with first-hand athletic experience to challenge conventional views on performance enhancement and advocate for a more nuanced and adequate approach to the topic. All right, Dr. Hutchison, how are you doing?
I'm doing fine. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being back. It's an honor. And man, what an interesting topic. We didn't talk about trans women sports, I think, in extent last time. So now we have the chance. Yeah.
That's right.
All right. So if you don't mind, I'd like to start our conversation by read one paragraph of your book that I really like. Yeah, is that okay?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So there you go. Thinking that we can take what Mother Nature has produced over millions and billions of years and change it with a handful of drugs and good intentions, it's pure hubris. Where that comes from?
That's a simple fact of the matter. There's many instances in which humans in particular, with the best of intentions, try to do things with what Mother Nature has already provided to us. And it turns out not just not to work as we anticipated it, but to actually have negative consequences in the long run. And I think this is a classic example of that same idea. Men and women have evolved to be two separate genders within our species and many, many others over literally billions of years of evolution. And it was made that way for a reason, because it makes it so that our species is better capable of procreating and propagating forth to make sure that we survive for the coming years. So to think that we can just turn a man into a woman, certainly within as it relates to sports, it's hubris, and there is no evidence to date that is actually something that we're capable of doing.
Mm-hmm. So just to be precise, we're talking just about sports here, right?
That's correct.
Yeah.
This is not something. Yeah, I put this in the book. I've got several trans friends. The book is actually dedicated to one of my oldest friends I've ever had in my life. I've known her, Adrienne Shepard, since 2005. She was a member of our wedding party. My wife and we just recently celebrated our 15th anniversary. We were married in 2010, and she's been an active member of our lives ever since. She gave her blessing to the book. She agrees with my stance on this. So this is not an anti-trans anything. I'm not interested in denigrating anybody. And I'm also not interested in preventing anybody from participating in sports. But there's a truth to be had here, and that is that trans women are not women. They are also not men. They're somewhere in between. But the technology that we have in place currently does not get them all the way to the point where we can actually consider them to be women as it relates to sport. And so they all have an unfair advantage.
Yeah, I mean, that's the title of the book, right?
That's exactly right.
Wow. Oof. It's a charged topic because, as you mentioned, there's a lot of I mean, what was the correct phrase? In good intentions, right? There's a lot of good intentions when you say like, oh, okay, now you transition, now you're a woman. Yeah, I mean, if you believe you're a woman, okay, that's great. I think in many aspects we can treat you as a woman, but again, when it comes to sports, like the physiology, I mean, you know more than I do. A lot of things are not applicable. Like you have a lot of different advantages. So, but before you dive into that, I really like the first chapter. You dived into the difference between cis and trans. So, correct me if I'm wrong. Cis comes from use butter as an example, right?
That's right.
So, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say this. So the analogy that I used was, the prefixes cis and trans and where they come from. Now they're not only used in organic chemistry, but that's the first time that I ever saw them in terms of a trans fat versus a cis fat. And it's the chemical formula of these two different kinds of fats is the exact same. They're made of the exact same stuff, but they're structured differently. And that gives them very different properties. So trans fats are synthetic fats. I mean, we can make these from typically plant fats, which are really cheap. And we're trying to make them more like animal fats, which we prefer to eat because they taste better. But they're a lot more expensive than our plant fats. But the problem is that when we make a trans fat that behaves very much like an animal fat, it's something that we're not very good at breaking down within the body. So it collects in our arteries and it makes us sick. And now I'm being very careful with my terminology here because I'm not interested in making anybody think that trans people are going to make us sick. That's not the point. The point is that a cis molecule is not the same as a trans molecule, and the same thing applies to the human body. A trans woman is not the same as a woman. Genetically, they're different. Physiologically, they're different. Now, with hormone replacement therapy, we go a long way to making trans women much more like women as it relates to sports, but it doesn't get all the way there. It's actually not even close. So the idea that you can just kind of put a prefix in front of a word and make it the same as the thing that you're trying to become is not true. It's simply not true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you touched on hormonal replacement therapy. That's the main way that those men use in order to transition. Am I right?
Correct.
Are there more drugs? I think there are way more drugs involved as well, or they are like options. You should take. So what is the main one? Is HRT,
Sure.
and then the other ones.
So HRT just is a process by which doctors use to transition a man into a trans woman. There are different possibilities in terms of what you will take. A lot of it's going to be specific to the individual. But the primary one you're going to get is estrogen. You're going to get significant amounts of estrogen, and that reduces your production of testosterone and also presents estrogen into the body. So on one end, you're reducing the influence of testosterone, which brings about secondary sexual characteristics in men like facial hair, square jaw, an Adam's apple, more musculature, thicker bones. Our sweat has more oils in it that bacteria like to break down, so it's stinkier than women's sweat is. So those types of things decrease. And then as you bring in more estrogen, we start to see that there is a transition to more female secondary sexual characteristics. Breast enlargement, the fat repositions itself from being central adiposity to more the hips and thighs. Those are the basic things that we would see. There's a lot of things that are related to sport as well that will change as you go through hormone replacement therapy. So there's a lot of brouhaha right now with people that are on the left or supporters of trans women in sport who say that there are no conclusive studies that show that there's a difference between men and women as it relates to sport. That's not true. But certainly between trans women and women, that statement is true. But that's only because the studies haven't actually been done specific to sports. The studies that have been done look at things that are related to sports performance, like the number of red blood cells that you have in your system, the amount of muscle mass that you have, and then your aerobic capacity. Those things will change to look more like what women would have, but not all the way. And so therein lies where the problem with just hormone replacement therapy lies. And there's no evidence to suggest that it's the amount of time that someone's on hormone replacement therapy that's going to make any difference. Several of the folks that we're looking at in terms of their sports performance, which is really all that matters, have been on hormone replacement therapy for years, significantly longer than the rules require them to be. And yet still, they're not close to being as slow as you would expect for a woman to be.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything else that those folks could take or do in order to have a physique more similar or of those of cis women, in order to make the sports more advantageous, like more fair?
I haven't seen anything yet. Now, there may be new drugs in the future that will come along, but they all have to be tested. And they have to be tested within the context of sports. So this whole idea that we're going to answer this question with peer-reviewed research that's done in a laboratory is completely false. What we really need to look at is the performance of that individual when they were men versus the performance of that individual after they've transitioned. And we also have to know what their training status was throughout. So if they're training less after they've gone through a transition, well, that's not a fair comparison, because they were training a whole lot when they were men, they decreased their training, or we don't know if they're training the same, and then they transition and they don't do as well. That's not a fair comparison. So what we do have is this. We have, for sure, one example, which is Leah Thomas. Now, Leah Thomas is a trans woman who competed in the 2022 NCAA Division I Swimming Championships, and she won one event, tied for fifth in another, and finished eighth in another event. Now, if we look at how Leah Thomas did during the 3 years that she competed as a man before her transition, she was a pretty mediocre swimmer as it relates to men. So the best example I have is in the 100 freestyle. Her best performance ever would have ranked her around 1,080th amongst the men in that year. And then if we look at that same performance in her 100 freestyle after she transitioned, she went up to 13th on the women's side. So if we're going to call this a fair transition, then any of the men who are going to transition have to be around the same place that they were ranked as men when they transitioned to be women. So if she was 1,080th as a man, she should be about 1,080th as a woman. But you can't possibly look at this and say going from 1,080th as a man to 13th as a woman is a fair transition. So right now what we're saying is there are no drugs in place that are making a difference that are significant enough to suggest that these people are actually like women as it relates to sports. Just that one component, only in sports.
Well, yeah, that's one point, right? And the other, I just remember, like, didn't Trump just decided that trans women in sports is not a thing anymore? I think this year they changed. It always started because of the Leah Thomas incident, right? It was the catalyst.
That was the biggest one. She was the first trans woman to win an event in NCAA history. Yeah. So that was a big deal. And it caught a lot of people's attention. Now, it wasn't just her performance in the pool. And this is the other point that I make very clearly in the book, is that when we say that the trans women are women, now they're eligible to change in the women's locker room. And Leah Thomas, at the time of the 2022 National Championships, had not undergone any type of surgery, to make a full transition in terms of genitalia. So Leah Thomas had testicles and a penis. And all the women who were in the locker room had to be there with somebody who's biologically male.
Gosh.
Now, that is really rough as far as I'm concerned, to put a bunch of 18 to 22-year-old women in a locker room with a biological male and say, just deal with it. Any of the people who complained, they were told, you need to go find another place to change. That's just remarkably unfair.
Oh yeah, it must be so
So
uncomfortable.
going back to your point, Trump did pass an executive order that effectively stated that their participation, trans women in sports, is against what we have here in the country called Title IX. And Title IX was a landmark legislation passed in 1972 that guaranteed that women had the same access to sports and education as did men. Now, the left was trying to say that Title IX covered trans women, but obviously Trump disagreed with that, so he passed an executive order to say otherwise. Immediately thereafter, the NCAA switched their rules completely and banned trans women from all sports in terms of competition only. But they can still be on the team. They can still practice with the team. They can still be in the women's locker room. Those things have not changed. All that's changed is that right now, the federal government says this is against the rules. The problem with that is, just like with Roe v. Wade back in 1973, that was all the Supreme Court saying that this is now the law of the land. However, Congress never actually passed a law making abortion legal, so that when a new Supreme Court came through and passed a new decision that overturned Roe v. Wade, and now in many states abortion is illegal. Under these same circumstances, if a new administration comes in that views trans women in sport more favorably, they can just do away with that executive order and make their own, and then we're right back to where we started. So in order for this to really be a law that protects women's sports for women only, Congress is going to have to actually pass a law, and that did not happen.
Okay. So basically, we can say that nothing changed.
Well, things have changed at least temporarily, so that's for sure. But it can change right back depending on who's in the administration.
Oh my god. Oh my god. From what
It's a heavy subject. It's a heavy subject.
yeah, but it's one that needs to be discussed. Like
Of course.
that's something that I really like about Brewcast. Like we have people from all around the world with all different topics. Like normally, like not always is the most light one, but I think that's how we resolved and advanced the conversation talking about it. We don't need
I agree.
to denigrate no one. That's not why you're here. Just for at least from my point of view, the point is to find a fair solution for everyone. I guess, like, again, going back to the title of the book, an unfair advantage. The goal, from what I see, is to make it fair. So what are your views on it, Dr. Hutz? How do you think we can make
So
it fair?
the only way to make it fair is for the trans women and maybe men to have their own division or divisions, plural. Now, the primary objection to this is that there just aren't enough trans athletes for that to be something that's going to be fair for the trans women, I suppose. So I have two responses to that. First, bluntly, that's their problem and not women's problem. And two, there are numerous examples of high-level competitions with very few athletes because there just aren't very many of them in that particular division. If you look at any of the sports that I put through in my book, which was track and field, swimming, and Olympic weightlifting, all of those are competed in different age groups throughout life, from young children all the way basically to the end of life. And in the upper age groups, so these would be like 85, 90, 95, and plus, when you look at the actual number of people who are competing at a national or international level, there might be 3, 4, 5 people that are there at the competition. But they still show up and they still compete with everything they have in them. So the fact that there aren't very many trans athletes now, number one, that's going to change because over time there will be more and more and more. And I actually encourage that. I want to see more participation and more representation of different individuals in sports. The last thing I want to see is sports turn into an elitist place where we only allow certain people to participate. We want inclusion of all individuals within sports, but we have to make it fair for all. And under the current circumstances, it's not fair. So they would have to have their own division in order to make it truly fair.
Having their own division will solve everything, and saying there's just not enough of them sounds silly.
It does.
Come on, I think it's just an excuse, because the way I see the pushback that exists of creating these own divisions, because by doing so you are indirectly admitting that they are not women, and that's something that they don't want to hear, and that's an uncomfortable truth when it comes to sports.
That's right. And that is really the toughest part of the argument to go against, because that is really related to emotion and not logic or science. The fact of the matter is very clear. This is the only characteristic within humans that we are saying is malleable to the point where we can just flip it. Why is it that it's just gender that we can go back and forth on? Why can't we do the same thing with race? Race occurs much more on a spectrum. You can have a mix of different ethnicities in one person, but you can't really have a mix of different genders in one person unless that person is intersex, which is a very different thing.
What? I never heard that
no.
before. Intersex?
So, intersex is a real thing. So the boxer who was in the Paris Olympics, the female boxer who's in the Paris Olympics, and that person is what we consider intersex. So genetically, she is XY, but during gestation within the womb, during development, we all have the capacity to either go female or male. What drives us in one direction or another is the genetics that we possess within us, and then their exposure to testosterone or estrogen. So during that process of generating this particular person, during that person's gestation, there was an error. And I mean specifically within the development of the individual, not the fact that there's some mistake with them. There's nothing wrong with that person. And I don't remember her name. That's why I'm saying that person. But that person then has a combination of two different sexual characteristics within one individual. So typically they'll have testicles that are undescended. They'll have either a partially formed vagina or a fully formed vagina with a partial penis within the place of the clitoris. It gets very complicated. But that represents a fraction of 1% of the world's population. What we're discussing here is trans women who are definitely XY and are born male and then try to transition to being female. So that's a very different group of individuals. My point being, if we look at race, there's numerous examples of individuals, typically white people, who then tried to convince others that they were black and live as black folks. And that is completely socially unacceptable, certainly within this country. Now, I went ahead and did my own genealogy test because I didn't have one done on myself. And both of my grandmothers were orphans. Now, my paternal grandmother is from Scotland, and we knew who her grandparents were. They just died when she was very young. But my maternal grandmother is from Venezuela, and she grew up in an orphanage, and we had no idea where her lineage came from. So when we all did ours, it turned out that I have about 7% black genes in my genealogy. And so, I mean, potentially, that's a whole lot more than female genes that I have in my system. I could say tomorrow that I now identify as being a black man, but that would not be appropriate, in my opinion, whatsoever, largely because I have not had any experiences of what it's like to live as a black man in this country, or any other for that matter, any more so than any of these trans women have had living their lives as actual women. Trans women will never have a period. Trans women will never go through menopause as a woman would. Trans women will never have pregnancy. They'll never have a miscarriage. I could go on and on. So they have not had the experiences of what it is to be a woman. Okay. But they are also not men anymore. They have their own set of experiences that I will never experience, that a woman would never experience, that we should look at, and we should cherish those experiences and those challenges that they've made it through in their lives. And we should venerate them just as we would any other group of individuals has their own experiences and challenges that we should always consider. Why that isn't enough for trans women, I'm not entirely sure. I understand that they wish they were women, but the fact of the matter is they simply were not born that way, and that's all there is to
it. You mentioned menstruation, right? I remember from reading the book that that was a very important point, because if you menstruate, you're kind of losing blood. And from what I understand, the amount of blood that we have is crucial for your like athletic performance. There you go. Thank you.
Sure.
Could you elaborate a little bit on that in the book?
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. So obviously, we all know the basics of menstruation. There's a period when there's an egg that's ovulated out of one of the two ovaries and travels down the fallopian tubes towards the uterus. If it is fertilized along the way, that typically happens within the fallopian tubes, then the uterus is sitting there prepared with an enormous amount of blood supply to it and a thickening of the uterine wall to make it capable of taking an implanted embryo to then start the process of pregnancy and gestation. However, if there is no sperm present or that egg was not fertilized, then basically the uterus says, okay, well, not this month, we'll try again next month. And it flushes all of that blood and additional material that it put down to take in a fertilized embryo and flushes it out. And basically it just starts over again. And the reason it does that is that anytime we build up a lot of blood supply and a lot of tissue in one area, it's metabolically costly. And so if we're not going to use it, you're going to lose it. And so women, once a month, if everything is going as it should, will lose a significant amount of blood that has to then be replaced. So athletic performance tends to dip pretty significantly during that time, and then it improves thereafter. But not just that. There are these fluctuations in hormones have significant consequences to the connective tissues of women, particularly when we're talking about ligaments and tendons, ligaments mostly. Women are much more prone to getting ACL tears, so the anterior cruciate ligament within the knee, significantly more. They're more likely to get an ACL tear than men by a lot, and that happens around specific times during the estrous cycle more so than others. When there's a lot of estrogen present within the female system, ligaments tend to get more lax. They get more stretchy. And when estrogen levels decrease and progesterone levels go up, they tighten up again. Those are things that a trans woman is not going to experience because they're going to take a steady dose of estrogen the entire time that they're on hormone replacement therapy. They're not going to go up and then come down and go up and come down as a woman would. So there is another advantage right there. One, genetically, that person is a male. So genetically, their tissues, their connective tissues tend to be stronger than females to begin with. And there's no evidence that that changes when we take hormone replacement therapy. And then two, without those fluctuations up and down, we don't have a laxity that's developing within those particular trans women. Now, we don't have data that's been collected on this yet because there simply aren't enough trans women athletes who have been subjected to that level of training where they're starting to see ACL tears. But we'll see how that happens as we move forward. I'm sure that there will be more. Right now, the best evidence that we have is to suggest that trans women will have a significant athletic advantage over women in as much as they will not be prone to as many injuries because genetically they're male.
Would you say that's the main difference?
In terms, no, that is one of many, but that is not the main difference.
I think it's important to list them because otherwise people can very easily just say, "Oh no, you're discriminating." No, like you're not. You studied that. There's a lot of difference. So you just mentioned one of them. What I would say is like one of the biggest of them.
So the biggest difference you see between men and women is muscle mass.
Muscle mass, yeah.
That is the biggest one. Now, there have been studies where they take a non-athlete population, they go through hormone replacement therapy, and then they check what they look like afterwards in terms of their hematocrit, which is the total number of red blood cells that we have floating around in our blood, their total muscle mass, bone mineral density, and fat mass. All of those things change to look more like women. The hematocrit decreases because there's less testosterone in the system. The estrogen makes it so that there is a loss of some muscle mass because there's no testosterone to pump it up. And bones, they may decrease in their density a bit, but there's also quite a bit of evidence that having a steady level of estrogen instead of fluctuations has a bone saving property in trans women that women don't necessarily see. So all of these things constitute some changes that will obviously bring down some level of athletic performance. The problem is this: none of the studies have actually looked at an athlete population going through transition over time. There's a single study that is a cross-sectional study. In other words, we're comparing one group of people to another group of people. And that's never as strong as looking at one group of individuals followed over time. So in the studies that we've looked at so far, the most recent one that was published that a lot of folks that are pro trans women in sports are touting as evidence that there's no difference. They took a group of men who transitioned to be women who were athletes, and we see decrements in again, not athletic performance, but just laboratory measures that correlate with athletic performance. So hematocrit decreases, muscle mass decreases, and fat mass increases. And they also did grip strength. So how tight we can grip a hand dynamometer, that decreases as well. A couple of problems. One, we have no idea where their measures were. Actually, so I shouldn't say that they decreased because we don't have a pre-measure. All they had was a comparison of after the transition, the women group with the trans women group, and comparing those two. But we don't know what the trans women looked like before they went through the transition because it's not a longitudinal study. And maybe they didn't change at all. Maybe all these folks had weak grip strength. We just don't know. And so what needs to happen in terms of a laboratory study is that we need to take a group of individuals who are athletes, men, who are determined they're going to go through a transition, and then follow them over time and measure them in terms of their athletic skills, not necessarily laboratory stuff. If they're runners, I want to see what their best run time is in their particular event before their transition and then after their transition. That's the only thing that really matters. Everything else that we would measure in a laboratory are all correlates of athletic performance and not athletic performance itself.
And I mean, that's really important because the more data there is, the more you can say just, hey, guys, look, there is a difference. Look at that data and that data. Like the more you have, like you start piling up all of those things, like, and then the unfair advantage becomes undeniable because right now it's, can you say deniable? Is that a word? Yeah, undeniable. Yeah, a little bit. They try with a lot of good intentions. They try to make it deniable. Yeah.
They're certainly trying to. I would not say that it's a deniable position.
Oh, okay.
No, I think it's quite clear. I mean, you don't need 50 examples. You need one. If you have a precedent that's set where one person clearly had an unfair advantage over the field, and we have that with Leah Thomas, then the precedent is set. And if it happens one time, it's not fair. And so, a lot of folks that are pro trans women in sport, they have three basic arguments, but the primary one is, well, these people aren't setting records. They're not winning every single event they're entering in by miles. And my point is, why does that matter at all? So let me give you an example. My daughter had a swim meet this last weekend. It was a 3-day swim meet, and it was one where we had preliminaries in the morning and finals in the afternoon, and you had to qualify to come back for finals. So this was the first time that she's ever actually qualified to come back for finals. And I can tell you how much that meant to her. It was an enormous accomplishment to finally make the top 8 in races that she competed in and come back and swim again that night to try to swim faster. Had she been bumped out of 6th, 7th, or 8th place by biological boys, that would be remarkably hurtful to know that they have the advantage over her and they also get to displace her from her rightful spot. That's basically what happens right now within women's sports, is that you have a biological male who is displacing women from their rightful positions. So even if you don't win the race, doesn't matter. If you make the championship final, that's a huge honor in itself. And if you get bumped out of your respective space because a male took it, that's simply not fair. So all we need is one example, and we have Leah Thomas, and we actually have several more examples thereafter.
Really?
Oh, yes.
Oh my God, I didn't know. I heard a lot about Leah Thomas, but I didn't know there were many, many more. Dr. Hutchison, I have a question about the test, though. I remember that when reading your book, you mentioned that I'm not sure if it's a specific test, you correct me if I'm wrong, or generally speaking, most of those tests that are done before doing sports. Apparently, some of them are very sensitive, though. Depending on the time of the day or the weather outside, they might highly interfere with the result. Is that one of the reasons why those tests are not being conducted more?
No, the tests that we're looking at, everything in this is predicated on testosterone levels.
Okay. So
the tests that we're talking about are just simple blood tests to check the amount of testosterone present within somebody's system immediately before competition.
Oh, okay.
So the NCAA had a series of rules. Now, they didn't actually set their own standard in terms of how much testosterone you could have. They just relied on the national or international governing body of each of those respective sports. So they kind of kicked the can down the road to somebody else in terms of making the rules. But here's the point. Testosterone levels on the day of competition don't matter.
What?
They don't matter. Testosterone is there for the purposes of making you bigger, faster, and stronger, and it stimulates you to respond well to training. But training happened months ago. The influence of testosterone that has an impact on athletic performance happens weeks, months, and sometimes even years ago. As it relates to trans women, the impact that testosterone has on them happened during puberty, which in many instances is a decade or more prior to what we're talking about. So everybody who sits there and says, well, they followed the rules were stupid to begin with because they were not based on science or reality. Everybody just says, well, if your testosterone levels is pretty close to what women's has, then it's fair. But they just don't understand the science because no one had looked at it yet. And so now that we have a very clear understanding, it simply does not matter what your testosterone levels are on the day of the competition. It matters what they were when you were going through puberty. And it matters what they were last week and last year. And so that completely misses the point.
And that's why little girls before hitting puberty sometimes are even stronger or faster than boys, right?
That's exactly right.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah.
So if and I'm hoping your readers will buy a copy of the book, but I put in there for the 3 sports that I looked at. Okay, and I did these for a reason. 1, I competed in all 3 of these sports at a relatively high level, and then 2, I've coached them all. And then 3, they all have age groups that go from childhood all the way through end of life. And so you can document the differences between male and female athletes from little kids all the way through the end of life. And what you see is that up until puberty, girls are right with boys. And in many instances, they outperform them, particularly around the 11, 12 age group. That's when girls will surpass boys. But then the minute that puberty hits, it's over. The boys just take off. And that's because they have testosterone, and the girls do have testosterone. Women do have testosterone, but significantly less than do men. Okay. And so that testosterone confers a bunch of different properties that allow for men to have an athletic advantage. So here, let's talk about those. Men will have more muscle mass, which is critically important to performing in sports. Men tend to have thicker bones, which makes them more resilient to damage or injury. Men, because testosterone stimulates the release of erythropoietin, which is a hormone that makes us generate more red blood cells, will have more red blood cells in circulation than will females, which means they can deliver more oxygen to their muscles. Men will also tend to have bigger hearts because their body size is bigger, and training allows for them to expand their hearts. Women can expand their heart size as well, but there's a limit to how big we can make it because our thoracic cavity only has so much volume. But men are bigger than women, so they can pump out more blood with every beat of the heart, which makes them more efficient at endurance activities. So if we have a man go through transition, these parameters will decrease and get closer to women, but not all the way down. 1. 2, for the people who are not college aged, so we're talking about the high school athletes in the states that allow for trans girls to compete against girls, there are no requirements for hormone replacement therapy to have been undertaken at all. So although we don't know if they have or have not started hormone replacement therapy, the point is that there's the potential for someone to just do what's called a social transition. In other words, they just wake up one day and say, I now want to be referred to as a woman moving forward. And that's all they have to do. They can still be 100% male with no hormone replacement therapy and competing against girls in athletics, which is absolutely foundationally, fundamentally unfair.
Man. In the book, you mentioned this movie, I think it was Steven Carell and Emma Stone. I don't know, but it's based on a true story that it highlights how powerful testosterone is and how drastic this change is. You correct me if I'm wrong, but apparently the story is between 2 tennis players, and the guy is retired. He's older. But they take another tennis player, a woman. She's way younger. She's like at the prime of her career, and that's his best match. Like they're matched equally in terms of athletic performance. That's how powerful testosterone is. You need to get a guy who's already like he's not at his prime, retired, kind of. Did I get this story correct? Is that the case?
You're almost there.
Yeah.
So the story it was called the Battle of the Sexes.
Yes,
and it happened in the early 70s. Okay, and so this was Billie Jean King, who was at the height of her career, and she went up against and I'm blanking on his name, but he was a tennis player who had challenged another number one woman previously, and that was Margaret Court from Australia, and he slaughtered her. That was a pretty big whipping. But this was at a time when women were trying to get equal pay in sports, and they had their own tour, which was basically started on a shoestring budget by Billie Jean King and several of her friends. And so, this came to pass, was this competition between these two. And Billie Jean King whooped him, but he was well past his prime, well into his 50s. And he was playing tennis basically as a hustle. It was his way to make money. And it wasn't a close match whatsoever. And I'm glad to have seen that, but that's not the same thing as we're discussing. But it is a point that's made all the time by proponents of trans women in sport, who will say quite regularly that if you take Serena Williams and you put her up against some guy, she'll destroy him in tennis. But that's not the point. Of course, if I came off my couch right now and went up against Serena Williams, she'd kill me because I can't play tennis. And even if I trained for a year or 2 or 3, she'd still destroy me because she's a true tennis player and I'm just a weekend hack. That's not the point, and that's not the measurement that we should be taking. The measurement that we should be taking is if you take the top-ranked male and you put them against the top-ranked female, it will not be a close fight. If you take the 50th ranked male and put them against the 50th ranked female, it will not be a close fight. Not until you get down way, way down do you start to see that the gap between them narrows a bit. But you can't put an equally ranked male against an equally ranked female in any sport that requires physicality and expect there to be a competition, because it will not be one.
I think you also talked about that when doing when comparing the Tour de France, like the guy and the right.
Yes.
What was the story?
Right.
It was the same story again. It's a very similar story.
So the point that I'm making there, let me just backtrack just a bit. If we look at the difference between men and women in terms of their physical capacities, so let's just look at the world records within track and field and swimming. If we just take the average of all the differences between men and women and world records, it's around 10%, something like that. Men perform 10% better than do women, okay, against equally matched, equally ranked competition, okay? That it's difficult for anybody who doesn't know sports to look at 10% and know what that means, because 10%, it doesn't sound like much. And so I was trying to give people a threshold by which they could understand the differences in percentage between individuals. So I gave the example of the Tour de France from 2024. So let me lay the groundwork here. The Tour de France is one of my favorite competitions in the world. And the reason why, it's not just a race for the top spot of the overall race. This is a 3-week race that circumnavigates the entire country of France. It covers around 2,400 miles, and there's usually just one rest day. There are stages that are flat. There are stages that are mountainous. There are stages that are hilly. And then they do these things called time trials where you go off one at a time and you're racing the clock. So it's just you versus the clock. And so there's actually 4 different competitions going on for 4 different jerseys. So there's obviously the yellow jersey, which is the overall winner, the best all-around cyclist. Then there's the white jersey, which is also by time, and that's for the best rider under the age of 26. Then there's the other 2 jerseys. One of them is the King of the Mountains jersey, and that is determined by points. And so wherever they have hills or mountains that are high enough, they have a certain number of points that are designated at the top of each of those mountains. And then if you have a stage that finishes on a mountain, then it's double points because you're going for the win. Okay. And so you collect all those points, and those folks aren't necessarily going for the win, but they're trying to win the King of the Mountains competition. Then there's the green jersey, which is the sprinters. And so the same thing that they do with the King of the Mountain, they do with the sprints. And so on the flat stages, they have intermediate sprints. So halfway through, there's going to be a line. They say the first person to get to this line gets 20 points, second place gets 18, and so on and so forth. And then at the finish line, they'll double those points. Okay. So you have these 4 different competitions. So it's very democratic, and it makes it so there's lots of people who have interest in watching this race for a number of different reasons. So last year, it was won by Tadej Pogačar, and he won by about 7.5 minutes, which is a pretty big margin of victory over second place. And he was going out every day to hammer his competition. Every chance he had a moment to attack, he attacked. There are a number of tours where when it's clear that the guy has it in hand, they stop attacking because they just don't want to anymore. But that was not Tadej Pogacar. He wanted to attack all the time. So he got first place. The person who was dead last place was 39-year-old Mark Cavendish, who was an English sprinter. Now, he had come back to the Tour because he was tied for the most career victories in the Tour de France in terms of stage wins, with ostensibly the best cyclist of all time, Eddie Merckx. And he was coming back to get one more stage win, and then he was going to be satisfied. So he got that stage win in the first week. And so then he set the record. And from that point forward, the only thing he was interested in doing was making it to the finish line in Paris. So when the mountains come along and you have a big, thick, muscly Mark Cavendish trying to drag his butt over these tall mountains, he is not trying to keep up with the folks who are winning. He is not trying to win the race at all. All he wants to do is finish each day within the time limit so he doesn't get disqualified so he can finish in Paris. Okay, so we have a difference between first place, doing everything they can to destroy the competition, and dead last place, not trying in any way, shape, or form to win. Got my only stage win. Now I'm just going to coast to the finish line. The difference between that, 7.6%.
Not a lot.
Okay. Well, it's not. It's 7.6%. But the difference between the best woman in the world and the best man in the world is 10%.
Exactly.
Which is even bigger.
Yeah.
Okay. So that gives you a sense as to just how huge these differences are, and those are in mostly aerobic and anaerobic activities that still last, 10 to 20, maybe 30 seconds. If we look at something like Olympic weightlifting, which is like a fraction of a second, now the gaps expand out to like 40 and 50% difference between
It's
men
insane.
and women.
It's insane.
It's so huge that to think for 1 second that we can just take some estrogen and maybe a surgery and a whole lot of good intentions and turn a man into a woman completely, not going to happen. Now, let me make sure I make this point abundantly clear. If we could eliminate that gap of 10%, we take a man and we make them 10% slower so that they slot right into where they should if they were a female, that's fair. Okay, so if Leah Thomas went from being 1,080th on the men's side in the 100 free to 1,080th or around that amount on the women's side in the 100 free, I've got no complaints. That would be a fair transition, but that's not what's happened.
No. I mean, ideally, what do you think would be the ideal scenario? Okay, create a new category for trans women, but I don't see that happening because then you're gonna have to admit that they're not women. What would be an alternative? Maybe like a heart size competition. You can only compete with people, but again, it just sounds like you're catering the whole thing to make it work towards those people. I don't know if that's a good way of looking at it. You have other alternatives or suggestions?
No, there really aren't going to be alternatives or suggestions. And the reason why is because there are natural fluctuations in heart size or the number of red blood cells that you have, or muscle mass, or height, or body weight, or any of these different things between men and between women that happen naturally. So, we don't understand all the differences that there are that exist already. It would be very difficult to set a threshold and say that this is the level. And what do you do if your heart's too big? Then you don't get to compete. It's either going to be separate division or basically nothing. Or they can compete as men if they want to. But I just think it makes more sense, considering that trans women use the term trans women and not women to describe themselves, because they know that there's something different than a woman. They're a trans woman, which is different. It's still like a woman, but it's not quite there. That's the only thing that we can do that's going to be fair. Now, there's already a precedent that's been set. The Boston Marathon has a non-binary division to try to get as many people into it as possible instead of it just being trans women, for the reason that we've already described. There are not enough trans women entrants in the Boston Marathon that they would want to have just that separate section for the time being. So they made it non-binary. So Boston Marathon is one of the biggest, if not the biggest marathon in the entire world. They've already got that. There are already people competing in that division. So it's an honorable way to respond to this, not crisis, but this dilemma that we have in front of us. And it's something that I can certainly get behind, and I can cheer on my favorite trans athlete in the trans women division or non-binary division, and so can everybody else. But that is the fair way to go. That is the only thing that we can really do.
Yeah, sounds perfect. Sounds like a good solution for me. But yeah, I mean, I feel like, again, from an outsider, I don't live in the US. It feels like things are slowly getting fixed and like getting better. And then maybe will come a new administration say, no, there's no genders, and now everyone can be whatever they want. They can be a horse if you want. And then I don't know, like then they create a division for people who identify as a horse. I don't know, man.
Oh,
I can talk from a game designer point of view because I see this being reflected on the I develop games, right? And I can see this is being developed in several video games that came out recently. Like they don't say male voice when you're developing a character, for example, building a character on I don't remember which game, and then you could, instead of having male voice and female voice, you can only select voice type 1 and voice type 2, which are clearly male and female. And then the new Nintendo Switch, I think, came out recently as well. Before you could select which one are you, a male or female. Now it's just body type 1 and body type 2. I don't know. I don't have any problems with that, but I'm just saying that it feels like humanity as a whole is going through a transition, and it's not sure if you take the next step or where do we go. It's a little bit awkward at the moment.
yeah. I mean, that expands our conversation into a different area, which I'm happy to go down. But I'm with you on that. In as much as I don't particularly like to see an abolition of genders. I don't want to live in a world where there's just this blended gamish of all sorts of things where there are not men and there are not women. We're all just humans. I like being a man. I like being identified as a man. I like to do manly kinds of things. And I like to hang out with my wife, who is a woman who likes to do womanly kinds of things. And there's obviously lots of crossover there. I do most of the cooking and cleaning in the house. She earns most of the money. Those things are societal aspects of it. But as far as the physical is concerned, I don't understand why it's necessary to say body type 1, body type 2. Why can't you have body type 1, body type 2, and or male female? Why can't you incorporate both? And not you, but generally speaking, I mean, I don't see why we have to go down one pathway and one pathway only. We can accommodate everybody in a reasonable fashion. And I'm also now speaking out to my folks, my friends on the right who are very much against trans in every capacity, that hopes that this will just go away. It's never going to go away. Trans folks are here to stay, and I don't want them to go away. But sure, we do need to make accommodations. But as we have stated quite clearly, we're talking about a very small group of individuals relative to the whole, and we're doing our best to accommodate all of their needs while not considering the women's needs whatsoever. If we look at the language, so there's several sports or several states within the country where trans girls are still allowed to compete against girls. And just 2 weekends ago in California, we had a trans girl who won 2 of her events against girls and won pretty big. And then in Washington, another girl, this is the second year in a row that she's won the 400 meters in her women's division. Although there seems to be a turning of the tide, the states that want this to be in place, they're fighting the good fight. They're going to keep their heels dug in as long as they possibly can. So, where do we go from here? I think that there's a lot of push towards the direction of making this change permanent. I think there'll probably be a second try at trying to get this legislation through Congress to make it so, like in the UK, where the Supreme Court came down and said, gender is defined by biology and genetics. We're going to end up doing the same thing. So my hope is that we can bring together both of the sides to come up with a reasonable compromise, which is to have separate divisions for the transgender population.
Yeah, that would be amazing. I think in Chile or Peru, so some of the South American countries, one of those, they deemed trans people or non-binary people as mentally ill, and I would say that sounds a little bit harsh. It doesn't. We don't need to go in that direction. I would say that's the other unhealthy extreme. Like there's no reason to treat these people like that. But yeah.
Yeah, I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a psychiatrist.
Yeah.
I know that the term that's used for folks who want to transition or are trans is that they're suffering from what's called gender dysmorphia.
Oh.
Which basically means now the American Psychological Association terms this as it's not a condition, but it's something akin to it. So it's not a mental illness, but it is something that requires some level of treatment. And the treatment of choice is to go through gender affirming care. Now, for years and years, decades, homosexuality was considered a mental health disease. And I'm certainly glad that that's no longer the case. And I don't see what benefit there is in designating people who are trans as being mentally ill. I don't get the sense that this is an illness. I think this is just the way that people are born. And I believe them. I 100% believe my friend, Adrienne Shepard, that she does not feel as though she belongs in a man's body and she wants to live as a woman. I absolutely believe her. There's no reason not to. And so everybody in the trans community who tells me that, and even if they're going from a man to a woman or a woman to a man, or they want to live as non-binary, I support that, because I am not going to interfere in your life at all, except to support you to do what it is that you feel you need to. But there are consequences to decisions that we make. And this is the point that I don't think the people on the left are very willing to accept, is that you're still not a woman. You're a trans woman, but we've established that that's somewhat different than actually being a woman. And so you can't just say, well, now I'm a woman and you have to accept me, and if you don't, you're a bigot. That's not fair. We have to accept you in as much as we want you to be part of our community. We want you to be part of our lives, but you can't just take over women's sports. You have to have your own place. Beautiful.
All right, Dr. Hutchison. Thank you so much. I don't have anything to add. I really like the book, and how you're not discriminating anyone, or just sticking to facts and how it affects sports. And I would like to thank you so much.
I appreciate it, and I hope your listeners will take a look at the book. And you can certainly reach me at alexander@goodegg.fitness. I will answer any emails that are sent my way that are legitimate, but I don't answer the ones that are filled with hate.
No hate, everyone. All right, thank you so much. Go get the book. We're going to leave the link on the description below. And I think that's about it. Thank you so much.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much.
All right, everyone, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment. Check out Discord if you want to continue the conversation. We have the Discord link on the description below as well. See you next time. Bye-bye. Thank you so much for hanging out with us today. If it's your first time watching the show, make sure to like and subscribe. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please rank the show 5 stars. This will ensure that the podcast is recommended to even more people and allow me to keep doing what I love. Check out now the Brewcast store, Explore store, filled with awesome goodies from hoodies to t-shirts to mugs. We've got you covered. Stay in style with Brewcast. Embrace the shock, set the trend. Buy now at brew-cast.com/store. Again, that's brew-cast.com/store. Link on the description below. Be a Brewcast model and get free stuff. We'd love to see how you and your loved ones enjoy Brewcast. Snap a picture of yourself, your family, your friends, or even your pets wearing Brewcast merch, or watching an episode of the show, and send it to us and become part of Brewcast. We will feature you and your pictures at the end of every episode, just like the ones you're seeing on the screen right now. You can upload your pictures at brew-cast.com/contact or tag us on social media. Alright everyone, it has been a pleasure. Thank you so much and see you next time. Bye bye.